Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our November book club. For those of you that might be new to JourneyWoman, my name is Carolyn Ray, and I'm the CEO and editor. And I'm just going to ask folks to mute for a moment, and then we're going to have a little bit of discussion. But so thrilled you're all here tonight for our book with Lisa C., Lady Tan's Circle of Women. And I know some of you might be new to JourneyWoman, so I just wanted to let you know who we are. We are actually the world's first solo travel website for women and established in 1994. So we are celebrating our 30th anniversary next year. And our book club is actually, we started it during the pandemic, and I just want to thank Wendy and Sally so much for doing this with me. You know, we started doing it during the pandemic, and many of you were on those calls. I think we did a book every month, and we counted it up just before you came on the call tonight. We think it's about 40 books that we've done, which is really exciting for us. And tonight, you know, the books that we're reading are about inspiring you to travel. We partner with Trip Fiction, and we try to pick books with a strong sense of place. And we also invite everyone to vote on the books. So we already have a lineup for next year, which we'll talk about at the end. But, you know, these books some of them might inspire you to travel, which is certainly my case. Those of you that might have joined us a few months ago for Still Life, I'm actually going to go to Florence and walk the streets that we read about in that book. But they're also about making you think differently about the world. And so we hope that you've enjoyed the books that we've done so far. I also wanted to let you know we have two events coming up in December. One is on expedition cruising. And some of you, if you're on our mailing list, you know that I spent about a month on an expedition ship a few weeks ago and through the Middle East and Africa. And I want to introduce you to this very sustainable way to travel on a small ship so you can learn about it. And the second event will be I think it's our 4th annual holiday social, which will be on December 7th. And there'll be more details coming on that soon. So anyways, I'll put the link in the chat, but again, just want to welcome you all to this book club. We're so glad you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to Sally, who is going to moderate our discussion tonight and introduce us to Lisa.
Hi, welcome everyone, and especially welcome to Lisa. I'm dialing in from Australia. Thank you, Carolyn. Suddenly I became big on my screen. I'm dialing in from Australia, and I would never have guessed 15 years ago when I first read Snowflower and The Secret Fan that one day I'd be sitting here on one continent and chatting with author Lisa C. on another. So this is definitely a bit of a pinch me moment for me. And I'm very excited to be sharing today with everybody here. So just a quick introduction. As an experienced traveler, Lisa is a bit of a journey woman herself. She was born in Paris, but she grew up in Los Angeles, where she spent a lot of time with her father's family in Chinatown. Her first book, On Gold Mountain, The 100-Year Odyssey of My Chinese American Family, tells the story of Lisa's great-grandfather, Feng Si, who was both the patriarch of the family and a leader in LA's Chinatown community. Lisa is a New York Times bestselling and multi-award-winning author with 12 published books, typically featuring strong female protagonists. Her novels include The Island of Sea Women, The Tea Girls of Hummingbird Lane, Shanghai Girls, Dreams of Joy, and many others. For our November JourneyWoman book club, we picked her latest release, Lady Tan's Circle of Women, inspired by one of the oldest female-authored books still to be in print today. And if the comments in our Facebook group are anything to go by, Lisa's novel has been one of our members' favorite reads. So welcome, Lisa. We're so happy you're here with us today.
Well, and it's wonderful to be with all of you and also just get to talk to you in Australia. I mean,
yes.
I just love that. And when Carolyn invited me to be on this, I just was very excited because I have done a lot of traveling, by myself. And I think as a woman, it's so important to get to do that. And of course, we have certain things that will, make it a little more challenging for us, but that it's something that's really important to me. So I'm just really thrilled to be here.
It's great. And you're definitely a presence here in Australia, Lisa. When I mentioned to my colleague yesterday that I was going to be chatting you with this morning, and she's an ex-librarian, and she was, Lisa C, you're talking to Lisa C. So we had a bit of a fangirl moment. And yeah, it's great to have you here in Australia. Usually we start our book club gatherings actually by asking everyone where they are, and because we're a big group, we didn't do that today, but if anyone wants to drop into the chat where they're dialing in from, that's always fun to see. So Lisa, I'll just start with a question and then I'll open it up. I have a few questions I'd love to ask you, but I'm going to open it up to the room and give everyone else a chance. But I thought I'd just start by commenting that female friendship is a theme that you have visited again and again in your books. And I think it is one that resonates with many of us here in the JourneyWoman community. So before I open the question to all the readers in the room, I was wondering whether you have your own circle of women and how they might have supported you in your writing.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I've often thought, or at least until I was writing this book, that I don't have any friends. Not really. And I don't have that kind of best friend that I always write about. I have witnessed 2 sets of relationships like that. My mother had 2 best friends from 7th grade all the way until the day she died. And so for 72 years. And I watched that my entire life. And in fact, the week after next, my sister and I are taking the 2 surviving friends of that who are now 90 out for their birthdays. But to have watched that. And then my sister, Clara, has her best friend, and they used to share a crib when they were 3 months old. So I don't have anything even remotely close to that. And I think I've really, but I've watched it. I've watched the good and the bad of that lifelong relationship. But I think I've also kind of struggled in my mind of thinking, oh, I'm just a loner and I don't, but really in writing this particular story, I really saw, and how she struggles herself with is she part of a circle, and that she does, it takes her a while to recognize who's part of it. And I think that that's true for myself as well. The circle that is the biggest for me or the most important are my sisters. And either I am an only child, I am the only child of my mother and father, or I'm one of 4. So I have a half sister that's my mother's daughter, a half sister that's my father's daughter, and a former stepsister, who, by the way, lives in Australia, who I have now known since we were 3 and 4. So, I've known her almost longer than anyone else still living. And these are the women who are really close to me. I did have a reader say to me, after I'd sort of talked about this, I don't have that kind of friendship, that by writing these relationships, that's given me the opportunity to have those relationships, to create them for myself. Because now, of course, I couldn't have one. I couldn't go back in time and create a relationship that would be a lifelong, but I can in my imagination.
That's lovely, Lisa. I wonder if, before I ask my other questions, or maybe even instead of, if there are enough of them, I wonder if we could just open up, and if anybody would like to ask a question, you can either type it in the chat, and I'll ask Carolyn and Wendy to help me keep an eye on the chat box. Or if you want to raise your hand now I can't see you on the screen because we've been pinned, Lisa and I, but I think if you raise your hand electronically, we'll be able to see, you'll pop up to the front. So if anybody would like to ask a question, please go ahead and do one of those things. And in the meantime, while you're typing or looking for where to raise your hand, I'll just mention that Lisa has made a remarkable body of research available to readers on her website, which is at lisac.com. And it really invites you to step inside Lady Tan's world with maps and photographs and information that brings the people, places, and practices of the book alive. I lost myself in your website, Lisa, for a while, looking at furniture and hairstyles and so much else. So I would encourage people to have a look at that as well. And I will drop that link into the chat. Lisa, there's a question from Elena, who's asked, how long did it take you to do the research for Lady Tan?
So each book takes me about 2 years. The majority of time is spent on the research. The writing is actually the least amount of time, and then the editing is somewhere in the middle. This book was very different for me. China was closed, during COVID, or the first couple of years of COVID. It only reopened, with those huge quarantines only ended earlier this year. So there was no way to be able to go there while I was writing. And then all of the libraries, all of the research libraries, all of the archives, everything was closed. And so I had to do the research in a very different way than I ever have before. Now, I did feel pretty good about writing about Wuxi. I couldn't go there. But I have been to many other water towns in the Yangtze Delta, particularly when I was working on Peony and Love. I visited a lot of water towns. I stayed in water towns. So I felt very proud about it. And then...
Sorry, just a second. Could I just ask everyone, please, to put themselves on mute? Thank you. Sorry about that, Lisa. Go ahead.
And then I had to reach out directly to a lot of scholars. And I think partly because it was the pandemic and they were isolated, that they were extraordinarily generous with their time and their knowledge. And some things, are very hard to find, like there's that point when Tan Yunxian is going up to Beijing on the Grand Canal. And I just had this thought of, like, how long would it take to go on the Grand Canal in 1496? And so I started reaching out to people, and it was just more and more and more and more. I mean, this was really hard to find somebody who would know that. And then finally I reached a professor who said, many years ago, I had a graduate student who, for his project, translated a diary that was written by a man who had been made ambassador to the island of Jeju that I had written about in Island of Sea Women. And on his way there to his posting, he was shipwrecked off the coast of China, taken prisoner and sent on the Grand Canal up to Beijing in 1493, 3 years before I needed. So here I have now daily entries of what he saw, what the weather was like, what he ate, and of course, how far he traveled each day. So, this is a very kind of esoteric thing to look for, but to me, it's those details that make it feel like you're there with them.
What an incredible find. That river journey for me was a very textured part of the story. And I think probably for many of us as travelers, that it raised questions about whether we would travel if it was so hard for us. And, we complain about our single supplements here in JourneyWoman quite a lot. And to think about how your protagonists, had to negotiate just to be allowed out of their cabins, to be on board, really did raise questions about whether this drive to travel that so many of us here experience, whether it would have been strong enough to get us out into the world in those kinds of conditions. Now, Patricia has asked how you pronounce the protagonist names. I think you said Tan Yunxian. Is that?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then Catherine has asked, she says that you include a lot of information about foot binding, and she could almost feel it when she was reading. Can you talk about that research?
So actually, this is, I've been researching foot binding now for 20 some years. You mentioned Snowflower and the Secret Fan. I wrote, about it in that book. Certainly in Peony and Love. If I look up on the shelf, in Dreams of Joy, and then this one, and each time I've tried to look at a different aspect of it. So this time I feel like, that first chapter when her mother dies from an infection, that I really wanted people to understand that this was a lifelong project. It wasn't just like you had it done when you were 5 years old and when you were 7 it was done. This was something you had to take care of for the rest of your life, or there would be dire consequences. And yes, I'm sure some of you out there know, China can be very hot, very humid. Your foot is basically rolled up like this, sort of like a sock, and your fingernails are way in there, wrapped in these long strips of cloth, and then stay that way for 4 days. Well, when it's hot, when it's humid, there's going on in there. And so you really had to take care to really cut your nails. If you think about if you're hiking and you actually needed to trim a toenail, how painful that can be and how it can cut into your foot. Well, if any time you broke the skin with a bound foot, you were opening yourself up literally to infection. So that was something that really pushed me, I think, for this particular story.
Your descriptions of the foot binding process were quite harrowing, but something that I appreciated very much when I was reading your work was how you reconciled that the deep love the mother had for her daughters, and how for her this binding of her daughter's feet was an expression of that love. I thought that was very powerful and very thought-provoking, and very significant for people reading about a practice from the outside, from a different time in a different country for many of us. I will just mention, I've got questions coming in the chat. I will mention that it turns out I can't see if people have raised their hands electronically. I don't know if Carolyn can, but I will encourage you to pop your questions into the chat because there are plenty coming through there. The next question came from Carol, and she asked what you thought of the cover and about other covers and how they change when the book is brought out in translation or in other countries.
So I really liked this particular jacket. It went through many different iterations. It's actually Photoshopped 3 different women all smushed together to make them look like that. And so, because there are no photographs or even paintings that have survived showing what she looked like. So to kind of create this fictional person, and then this seems like a minor thing, but a whole question about what the background color was going to be. So the publisher sent me probably about 10 different versions, but with different background colors, yellow and purple, and orange was kind of a orangey gold one was in there. But and then I propped them up around this room and just left them there for about a week. And the one that I just kept coming back to was that dark green, which was a kind of funny color. And we all debated about it quite a bit, because I'm so sorry, there are things ringing all around me, just ignore it. Because it came out in summer here. And so, if you think about a summer book, it was usually pastels and, pretty blues of the ocean and the sky. But this had a much more of a fall feel to it. But we all just liked the jacket so much that we stayed with it. And as far as I know, it's been sold to about 19 countries, but not very few of them have already come out yet. It takes, each country translated, it has to fit into their publishing schedule. So I actually haven't seen that many of the jackets. So far, all of the countries have kept the original jacket, but sometimes what people do is just crazy. What? Did you even read that book? I can, and I can say, yeah, but, I don't have a lot of say, what they're doing in Bulgaria or Russia. Actually, Russia is a good example. With Island of Sea Women, I really hated that jacket. And they had these women in kind of like these bikinis, it was all very stylized. I was like, those women would have worn anything like that. But this was going to fit into this other sort of larger series of books about women. And you can see, these jackets are all, you can tell they're part of the series. So they were just trying to make it look like it was part of the series. And the book did really well. So, just because I didn't like it didn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do. Just because it was historically inaccurate, it turned out they sold a bunch of copies.
For people who are interested in the covers, again, I'm going to drop a link. I spent a very long time on your website, Lisa, and I'd recommend if anyone goes in there that you take a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or something with you, because you're bound to spend a lot of time. If you are interested in covers, Lisa's also put in a lot of the international covers of her other books, and I'm sure the Lady Tan ones will follow there in time. So I'll drop the link, and feel free to have a look at those. Now, Margaret has asked, if you could approach your novels from only one perspective in a discussion, political, historical, sociological, feminist, etc., which perspective do you think would have the most profound influence on modern women? So that's quite a complex question.
It is a hard question. One thing I think about a lot is, how do these women's lives in the past relate to our lives today? Have we changed so much in 500 years or not? And I think it's true that we can say, I'm really glad I live now instead of then. But there are other things, and particularly in this book, where we are still connected, in the sense that it doesn't matter, if we lived 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or right now today or 500 years from now, that women, no matter where they are in the world, no matter what year it is, we are all connected by our biology and physiology. And it doesn't matter as well, like where you are in the social strata. There's a reason why I have, I really wanted to sort of hit all these different classes of women. In real life, Tan Yunxian did not go to the capital and treat the empress. However, that story of the midwife miscarrying in front of the empress and what happened and how the emperor was going to have her decapitated, and the empress and all of the ladies of the court saved her life. That is a true story. It happened to another midwife named Midwife Peng. But what I wanted was to show, here you have servants, concubines, wives, this category of, sort of widows and spinster aunts, working women, the ladies of the court, all the way up to the empress. And again, it doesn't matter like where you are on that scale, we still were connected by our biology and physiology. Now, do we have something comparable to that stratified society today? Well, you could start with your, if you have a cleaning lady who comes, or the nice person who comes and cleans your hotel room, and, working your way up, working women. Well, maybe you work at Starbucks, or maybe you're a brain surgeon, but still working women. And all the way up, do we have an empress? No, but there is Beyonce. So, There are things that correlate to today. The other question for me, and again, particularly with this book, but I think it's a theme that has come up in other books, is who has control over women's bodies? And, you know, while I was writing this, it was right at the end, I think I was in copy editing. And this won't mean that much to you, Sally, but, you know, in the United States, the Supreme Court brought down the Dobbs decision, which now made, you know, took away this freedom for women in abortion. And so, you know, I didn't know that when I started writing the book that this was going to happen. But I think that we could go all the way back to caveman days, and people were arguing about who has control over women's bodies. We can go to herd time, where clearly people were arguing about who has control over women's bodies right now today. And I suppose when we're all living on Mars, people are still going to be arguing this question.
When you said those words for the first time, Lisa, who has control over women's bodies, I can only see a half dozen faces along the top of my screen. And in unison, every single one of the women nodded. You know, it is a hugely topical matter now, but always has been. And I think we've learned recently that we can't count on wins we've made in the past. Things that we think are irreversible have a way of being pulled out from under us. There is a question from Jennifer, who says, I'm curious about her grandmother and how she was allowed to practice medicine. Was it only within the household?
So her grandmother is what was known as a hereditary doctor. She'd learned from her parents, who'd learned from her parents, who'd learned from her parents, and so on. And as far as anyone knows, you know, in the historic record, her grandmother didn't write anything that was saved. She did leave her notebooks to her granddaughter, to Tan Yunxian. But, you know, whatever happened to them, no one knows. But that as far as anyone knows, she really was only treating the women and girls in her family compound. And so, and the same with Tan Yunxian. You know, it's really these elite women and girls in the family compound, plus the servants who took care of them. So, you know, this kitchen scullery maid, a lady, you know, a lady's maid, things like that. But what made Tan Yunxian's book so interesting, at least to me, was the fact that there were other women in there. You know, the woman who holds the tiller on a ship, the woman who's the brick and tile maker. And so if she, like her grandmother, wasn't supposed to go out into the world, you know, not take more than 3 steps beyond her front gate, how did she meet those women? And that was one of the big things that inspired me as I was writing this story and researching her life, was how did she get out? You know, how did she do that?
Yes. We have a bit of conversation happening in the chat. I was about to read out Laura's question, and I see some other readers have helped to answer. She was asking about the inoculation or why Lady Tan's daughter wasn't inoculated. And Elena, thank you, has clarified about her being sick when the smallpox inoculator came around. But that, of course, is also a very topical point of discussion today. I will just come back to one of my questions that I'd like to ask. I'm just fascinated about your research, and I was wondering, when you are researching, you've said you know you can take 2 years to work on a book, and do you ever find that while you're researching, you discover something that causes you to take a different direction from your planned progression of storytelling? Does it ever make you do a U-turn and build something new into your story?
Yes, and in fact, it's the research that inspires me in so many ways and helps to build the story. So, you know, a couple of examples of that for this book are the story of the worm, the message written on the baby's foot, and of course, the midwife miscarrying in front of the empress. All of those things happen to real women. And so, you know, when I came across one of those stories, it was like that worm. I was like, oh, I've got to use that. You know, I've got to use that. And so for me, it really becomes a question of where in the story it's going to be. You know, is it at the beginning, the middle, and the end? Why is it there? What's the ripple effect? But for sure, the research really helps me build the story because, you know, those things are so, you know, amazing and fun and creepy sometimes. Now, Wendy, I see Wendy is raising her hand for a question.
Yes, Wendy.
I just have a follow-up question. How much of the story do you have sort of outlined when you begin your research? And, you know, so where do you pull that initial story together so you can go out and branch out to do the research?
Well, this was very different because I had her book, and there are several forewords written by different men. There are several afterwords written by different men, most of them in her family. And then she herself wrote this introduction about how she became a doctor and you know, what inspired her. And it's a lot about her grandfather and her grandmother, and also very noticeably never mentions her husband or her husband's family. And there's been a lot of speculation about why that was. So, you know, I had some basic facts about her, but beyond her own book, there's very little known about her. So I really had to do other research to kind of shore up the story and create more of a story. So, of course, one of the things in doing the research was when I came across smallpox and how smallpox swept through China every 3 years, and that China was one of these early countries to invent variolation, an early form of vaccination. And of course, the arguments about variolation, pro and con, were so identical to what was happening right as I was writing the book. I mean, I've had a lot of readers say, oh, did you just take what was being said now and put it on those characters? No, it was that what those people were saying, you know, 500 years ago was just being echoed today in the exact same arguments. It was weird. So, you know, I wanted to use that. I think somewhere in the research, I stumbled across the book, The Washing Away of Wrongs, that is the oldest book of forensic medicine in the world. And I really thought that this would be interesting to include a lot of that. You know, her husband, her father, and her grandfather, and her uncle all worked for the Board of Punishments. And I really thought about how this, you know, is this group of men who are tasked with going out across the country and investigating death. Was it natural? Was it an accident? Was it murder? And then they were acting as sort of the policeman, the investigator, the lawyer, the judge, the jury, and of course they were the ones who decided on the punishment. So it was very much about death. And then over here, and you know, very influenced by this washing away of wrongs. And then over here you have Tan Yunxian and her grandmother, healers, right? Doctors who were healers. And then over here, this category of midwives. And Confucius was the one who put all the professions in this kind of hierarchy. And at the very, very, very bottom were people who came in contact with blood, coroners, butchers, and midwives. To me, this idea that midwives would be in that group really didn't make sense to me because, you know, they're the ones who bring life into the world. So that was part of the reason why Mei Ling is a midwife, is that then I could sort of look at these three things, one about death, one about healing, one about bringing life into the world, and how they all relate to each other and are connected or not connected.
I was fascinated to to read that the midwives would be involved in the coronial investigations, something that hadn't occurred to me might happen. So that was very new for me. We have a question from Kathleen. She asked, did any of Lady Tan's progeny become women doctors? So do we know anything about her children or her descendants?
This is one of the questions that scholars have really tried to find the answer to and have not. There is nothing in the record that she taught any of her daughters. Now, she might have, and maybe they even became doctors, but the big difference between her and everyone else is she wrote a book that's still in print today. And if you think about your own doctors out there, 500 years from now, will anybody remember them? Probably not, unless they won a Nobel Prize for medicine.
Yes.
So of the 12,000 known historic medical texts in China, only 3 were written by women, and hers is the oldest one. So I think that's why we know about her, and not so much, and about her grandmother, who she wrote about, but not about her daughters.
Catherine has asked something about the structure of your book. She says, so many books I read now start somewhere in time and then have tons of flashbacks. You've chosen a more traditional, more straightforward storyline, which I liked a lot. Have your publishers supported your choice? So do you get much input from your publishers into the structure of your books?
Actually what I do is I like to talk to my editor before I start writing about what the structure is going to be, how I'm viewing it. Because I think it's really important that they be on, that my editor be on board with it. Certainly we've just done that with the new book. I do feel that, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I have followed this kind of linear structure for several books, where there is a little girl and she grows up and you kind of follow her. It's true in Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Island of Sea Women, Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. I sound like I've just written the same book over and over again. I am putting readers in a completely different time, in a completely different culture. And so I am also trying to make it, bring people into that time and culture. That's already asking a lot, to step back in time 500 years, where there's very little, it's like, how do people get water to drink? What do they eat? How do they take a bath? Who washes the clothes? Who cleans? Just how do you get from here to there? It's all so complicated. So that whatever I can do to kind of simplify in other ways, that's what I do. Now, Snowflower and the Secret Fan does begin with, Lily as an old Lady Tan, as an old woman, and then the whole book is a flashback. I think I've done it in a couple, actually, if I look up there. But that's so Peony and Love, is a ghost story. So it's really told from the perspective of a ghost looking, interfering in life today. So that also had a very different structure. But for the most, and then Island of Sea Women, it is linear, but there are what I thought of in my head is these little interludes that are about 4 pages long that all take place in 2008. And so, you can pull those out and together they tell their own story. And there are clues and things that are revealed in those little sections that you have to really pay attention to those. Because they, like I said, they're telling you things that, one of them was that the main character's daughter, who hasn't even been born yet in the story, has died. So, there are things that are being planted in there that you had to really pay attention to.
I don't think you need to worry that any readers think that you're telling the same story over again, Lisa. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be looking forward to seeing what you come up with next as much as we do. Carol has asked, she says, the issue of medical cannabis is big in the USA now. How were plants used in Lady Tan's time to treat symptoms and diseases for women and in childbirth?
Well, they were used a lot, and so many of those remedies that she created that are very specific to women are still used today. That's why her book is still in print. And they were all herbal based. That doesn't mean that some of them weren't not necessarily herbs, but could have come from some other, ground up bone or some other ingredient, but natural in the sense that they came from the natural world.
And we have more than one Carol here today. So Carol Hudson has asked, have you had the opportunity to see the actual book that was written by Tan Yunxian?
I have actually two different copies. I have one, the English version, but also a friend, when she was in China, brought me back a very beautiful edition that has been republished recently. And then I have a Xerox copy of her book in the original, it's not her original one, but when her great nephew republished her book. And so this is I have Xerox copy of that, and I do have photos of that on my website.
Wonderful. Does her original copy that she wrote in her own hand, does that still exist anywhere in the world, or do we work from her?
No,
Okay.
One of the things is that after she died, no one knows what happened to all of her notebooks. This is the big things that her nephew speculates about in his final afterword, and what, of course, scholars have been trying to figure out for the last 500 years is, once this book was published, it's only, I think, 32 cases. She's only 51, but she lived to be 96. And it was said that she became an even better diagnostician over time. She was one of the mythical doctors of the past who could look at somebody and see through them to what was wrong. But then what happened? What happened to all of that? And so her nephew speculated that, oh, maybe they just threw everything out after she died. And then his other option, I actually can do a little show and tell. So this is a ginger jar, and that people would, had torn the pages out of her notebooks and used them to put on the top of pickle jars like this. And it's, when we make jam, sometimes, or preserves, you have the cover, but then we'll put the paper with a little string or ribbon.
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that, imagining that's how the pages of her books ended up. Yes, and also it made me think, this is why I have to be so nice to my nieces and nephews. Can you imagine if we hadn't had that act of homage from the nephew that still, has that book still in print today? It's incredible. And now back to your books. I'm sorry, the questions are jumping around a little because of them coming from so many different people. Virginia has asked, is there a best order to read your books for connecting the history timeline? Or can one read them as standalones in any order?
I mean, if you were trying to read them chronologically through the time that the story is about, I guess you could do that. It's never really occurred to me. But gosh, I would have to even I would have to think about how to put this in kind of order. This one would be the oldest in time. Then I think Peony and Love. Then maybe Snowflower. Then Shanghai Girls. Then Dreams of Joy. Then China Dolls. I guess, of the historical novels. And then my first book is a nonfiction book that tells the history of really the Chinese in America through the eyes of my own family. And then I also wrote 3 mysteries that started, they take place in, I say contemporary China, but already it seems like so long ago. It's no longer anything like what I was writing about. Sort of 1991, I think it's 96, 98, and 2001. So, you know, obviously China has changed tremendously in that time period.
Mhm. There's a question from Linda, and I'm actually not quite sure exactly. I don't recall what Linda's referring to myself. She says, I found the comments about being Confucius women was interesting. Was this what women of that time strive to achieve?
So she did live in a time when Confucian beliefs really filtered through society, culture, family. You know, Confucius, he was a great thinker, he was a great philosopher, but it's also true that he really didn't care much for women. And so he has all of these sayings like, you know, when a girl, obey your father, when a wife, obey your husband, when a widow, obey your son. An educated woman is a worthless woman. That's a nice one. And a good woman should never take more than 3 steps beyond her front gate. Which is interesting for JourneyWoman, right?
Yeah.
There's a woman who really was Confucian in many ways. She went into an arranged marriage when she was 15. She gave birth to 4 children. She certainly took care of her husband's household. At the same time, she was an educated woman. At the same time, she did journey more than 3 steps beyond her front gate. So this, you know, this was something, one of the things that really fascinated me about her is that even though she was very traditional in many ways, she also really circumvented what the rules were for Confucian women. And it is one of the things that, you know, influences how and what she wrote about. So I mentioned earlier that, you know, she didn't mention her husband in her introduction. Did I say that to this group? Because
Yes.
you're actually
Yes.
okay.
Yes, you did.
So she didn't mention her husband, and scholars have really wondered, like, why didn't she do that? And one of the theories, well, one theory is she didn't like him. Another is, and probably a little bit more logical, is that she really was doing something that was completely out of what was acceptable for a woman to do. And by leaving him out of it, then she wasn't putting any embarrassment on him or his family.
Mhm. Mhm. Patricia has raised a more of a comment than a question. She said the most memorable and the most memorable and wrenching image I have ever read is in one of your books, and that's where the mothers have to leave their little babies in holes in the ground.
That was in Dreams of Joy during the Great Leap Forward in China. And this was the largest man-made starvation in the world. Well, comparable to what happened in Russia under Stalin. So between 30 and 50 million people starved to death over 3 years in China. And you know, people were desperate, and they would dig these holes and put small children in them, you know, so they couldn't climb out, but hoping that someone would drive by or walk by and rescue them.
We quite often, as part of our regular JourneyWoman discussions, we have an opportunity for people to share what their favorite passage in a book is and why. And I know when I was making my notes before we knew you'd be joining us, Lisa, I found the line that really struck me in the heart was the line. It says, we say we want sons to continue the family line, but sometimes I wonder if what we're really saying is that we'd rather have a son than do this. And that was talking about binding her daughter's feet. And you really, I think in many of your books, you've captured that intensity of love between mothers and children, and how circumstances can make that a very painful experience as well. And I haven't read the book with the babies having to be left in the holes in the ground, but yeah, that's another thing that just struck me just reading Patricia's comment. Does anyone have any other questions? We're coming up for 10 minutes before the hour. Is there anyone? I'm looking for waving hands, and I can see Wendy's cat's tail waving. So I got excited there. I thought there was some movement. I just have something's come up from Catherine. Yes, Catherine's asked, tell us about your new book or your next book.
Right, so this isn't the only historic backdrop, but it is part of it. The 1871 Los Angeles Chinatown Massacre. And in the 1870s, Los Angeles was just a tiny town, only 5,000 people. By comparison, San Francisco was well over 100,000. And Los Angeles was considered to be the wildest of all of the Wild West towns. More stabbings, more shoot 'em ups, more gunslingers and gunfights, legitimate hangings and lynchings than any other Wild West town. So more than Dodge City or Durango or Laramie or Deadwood, the most violent. And in October of 1871, 10% of the population participated in this massacre, during which they killed 10% of the Chinese who were here. So there were only 190 Chinese, and they shot, stabbed, and hung 19 Chinese men and boys. This is considered to be one of the largest, if not the largest, mass lynching in this country. Now, I'm telling the story from the perspective of 3 Chinese women. At that time, only 34 Chinese women were here in Los Angeles. And I think about that a lot, what that must have been like for them to be in this just very wild, dusty, dry, crazy town. And so the first one, it was only 15, and she was brought here to be in an arranged marriage to a very much older Chinese merchant. And it wasn't long after she arrived that she was kidnapped and held captive for many months. And it's eventually her kidnapping that triggers this massacre. So I think of her as the kind of Helen of Troy of the piece. The next was the wife of the Chinese doctor. Now, he did have some Chinese patients, but most of his patients were the Anglo population. Now, this is not long after the American Civil War. Western medicine was really backward, but Chinese medicine had already been around for a couple thousand years. And so people went to him, the sort of elite of the city went to him because he wasn't a snake oil salesman. He wasn't going to saw off your arm with no, anesthesia. He really knew what he was doing. Anyway, he was the second person killed. And his wife became the first Chinese woman to sue the city of Los Angeles. So, really taking control of what had happened and trying to get some redemption for what had happened to her husband. And then the last is a composite of 2, again, real women who were sold by their families in China, brought here against their will, sold into prostitution. Now, this is, again, just after the Civil War. Slavery has been outlawed. It's in the Constitution. And yet there was one exception, and that was for the ownership and sale of Chinese women in California. And so from the moment these 2 women landed here, they did everything they could to escape and find freedom.
Do you know when this book's going to be coming out, Lisa? Because I think everybody here is making a note.
In chapter 3, so it's going to be a while. But 2 years.
We'll be watching for it.
Yeah, I hope
I-
to join you again because, you know, just listening to, hearing myself say that these were, you know, women who were journeying by themselves,
Mm.
you know, in 1870, and it was hard. Let's say.
Yes. We've been talking a lot about human trafficking in many of our book clubs. It's something that it's something that is very harrowing, and is something I think that we're all aware can happen to anybody, and that I think women particularly are able to empathize with how horrendous such a situation can be. So it is 5-1, so I am going to call it. There are more questions and comments in the chat, but I am going to have to end the conversation because I know Carolyn would like to talk to us about something as well. Lisa, thank you so much. We are so grateful. I was so excited when I saw on your website that you attend book clubs, and so grateful to you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I just really enjoyed it, and I hope we get to do it again one of these days.
I do hope so. Carolyn.
Oh, wow, that was great. I would stay on and listen to the other answers if if we had a little more time, but thank you so much, Lisa. And you know, I think I do love that you're kind of tackling issues that need to be discussed and need to be raised. I think it's important. These are important things for us as women to be talking about. So thank you for that. Just to close off, Sally, wonderful as always. Our next book club will be in February. So it'll be the third Wednesday in February, which is February 21st. And we're going to be reading The Storied Life of A.K. Fikri, which is a very entertaining book if you haven't read it. And we'll be sending out, we're going to put together kind of our favorite books that we've done over the last 4 years together and send those out to you soon. So you can maybe get some Christmas shopping or some holiday shopping done and picking some of our favorite books. And I know that this one will definitely be on the list, Lisa's book. And I just want to say, Lisa, I'm also reading this book, and which is also fascinating, The Island of Sea Women. So so thank you for all you do. And we will let you all head off for the evening. But again, just want to remind you that we have our holiday social on December 7th. And I hope you all can make it because it's lots of fun. And we have singing and prizes and all kinds of things going on for this year. So there's a couple questions. I will put the list for the next year right in the chat here, but it's also on our website under the books section, and you're more than welcome to go check that out. All right. Anyone else want to ask anything? No? Okay. Well, we'll do a big wave. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Wendy.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.